competed in the 1952 Olympics for Denmark in
So tiny.
right
Gymnastics.
Gymnastics. One of the sports that I did not compete in. They looked at me and said, "We don't think so." Borge, it's all yours.
I will probably try to stand over at the projector. This is an old slide projector. I couldn't really figure out how to just put on a disc. So you're going to have to put up with a slide projector. But one thing about it is it works. It's not one of these modern computer things you can't make work. This works. So let me just state in the beginning that it was kind of a tough time for the Danes. So it's a serious subject, and you will understand why when I give my program that it was not something that you really prepare for. So with that, I'll start my slides, and then I'll try to use that as a background, and I'll give you a little geography and a little bit of history of the Second World War before I go into my actual slides of the events that happened. Now, I hope my voice will carry.
Can we turn the lights on? Misspelled.
We need to turn the light down.
That's how Dane spell it. Yeah.
This is Jutland, the main part of the country. This is the island of Sealand, where Copenhagen is located. And this is Fenen, where Hans Christian Andersen's birthplace was in Odense. This town of Aarhus is the second largest city, and it plays a role in my talk. So you will hear about that. I was born right here. And I still have family in this area here.
What was the name of the town?
Viborg. V-I-B-O-R-G. It's located right here below this water here. You can't hear? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, just to get a little background for what happened when the war started. You know about Rotary in North Africa, and you know that the Germans occupied Scandinavia. The thing you may not put together in one piece is that what Hitler was trying to do was support his empire from the south, what you call the underbelly in Africa. And that was also, he took this area here because he didn't want the British and the Allies to come in here from the north. So he protected Germany from north and south. This is why this all happened, because we didn't have a lot of supplies for the German army other than agriculture. So the only reason he took that was just to protect his country. Now this shows what actually happened with sea power the day that this happened. Now let me just start out saying that even though the main event happened on the 9th of April, 1940, it actually happened on the 8th. There were truck drivers hauling fish from the coastal areas here, from the coastal areas into Hamburg. And when they came south of the border on the morning on the 8th, they met a 30-mile column of military right here. And of course they were very disturbed over there and I wondered what was going on. So they called the border guards, and the border guards said, "Don't worry about it, there's nothing to worry about." The government has kind of downplayed the situation even though they knew what was happening. And so they were moved up in here, and then they moved up into Norway and so forth. Now, what did we hear on the 9th, and what did we see? We didn't really see anything to start with because it all started around 4 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark. We heard a lot of airplane noise, and it was just kind of confusing. Then when daylight broke, then we saw that these German planes here were 3-engine planes, and they were flying for information going north, and it started at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they flew for 48 hours constantly. They never stopped. As soon as one group was gone in the horizon, 4 more came, and they did that for 48 hours. And of course, we had no idea there were that many airplanes in the whole world. It was just overwhelming. What they were doing was that they were going to Norway and bombing strategic points to making sure that the Allies did not try to land ships in the Norwegian fjords and around Oslo. So they made sure that did not happen. They didn't really bomb Denmark, but what the Germans had told the king was that if you don't lay down your arms, then we will level Copenhagen and we'll bomb it. And so the king was assumed that there was no other choice, so he went on a radio and he told the Danish people to just treat the Germans with as much dignity as you can and go back to life as normal. So that's what they did. But nothing was normal. Now, you've all heard about SS, but these are not SS troops. This is what we saw. These are actually Wehrmacht soldiers, probably professional soldiers. They were not SS, but they wore these black uniforms. And we didn't really see too many of these black uniforms later because they were the people that would go to the front. But that's what I remembered seeing mostly. And there were tens of thousands. As a matter of fact, the day they moved in, there were 40,000 troops. Before the war was over, Denmark was occupied by 180,000 troops. So it shows you the difficulty they had controlling the country. This is a street scene of my hometown of Viborg, and this is a hotel called Chrysler, and that played a role in this event here. This picture is actually taken after the war. In Copenhagen, since there were really no large bridges between the islands, they landed the ships in the Copenhagen harbor, and the Danes weren't too concerned about the danger because they all lined up on the dock. They were curious about what was going on there, but they landed ships there, and they occupied strategic points around the capital. This is the military column that came into our town looked like that. I don't know what day that was, but it was probably the 9th or the 10th of April, the 1940 that they came in, and we saw all of this just everywhere. It was just suddenly turned into a military camp. This is a scene from Copenhagen. They set up these radio control stations, and they were in contact with similar setups throughout the country. And this all happened by noon on the 9th. By noon, they were coming back from Norway, landing on a Danish airfield, reloading bombs by noon and flying out again. That's how effective the military was. It all happened from 4 o'clock in the morning to noon. We saw these kinds of setups the Danish military was trying to do some stuff to try to stop some of this, and in particular there was a military academy close to the southern border that sent out troops, and they weren't supposed to dig in because the government didn't want them to hide. They wanted the Germans to see them. But they dug in anyway, but it only took a few minutes and the Germans had them wiped out. So it didn't last long. So they set up these kind of machine gun nests everywhere they thought they need to control the people. Bridges was an important thing, and they didn't have near the many bridges then as they do today. But this one is one of the main bridges between the main area of Jutland and the smaller island of Feenan. And interesting enough, this happened on a night too. They were checking the cars. People were roaming around trying to find out what's going on, and the Germans stopped these people to check, make sure they didn't carry any weapons. And what's really telling about this, that was probably one of the last days that you could drive a car, because there was no more gasoline. The Germans took all the gasoline, all the cars were put up on blocks, and there was no more driving. The only people that could drive during the occupation were doctors, veterinarians, and like ambulance drivers and that type of thing. So there was no more cars. And that's 5 years. You know, 5 years is a long time. You get to think about it. Obama's presidency has been 4 years. This seems like a long time. This was 5 years. The Danes were stubborn, and they were challenging the Germans. And there's a picture where this lady wants access to her job, and the Germans are occupying the building, and she said, "You can't go in there," and she was arguing with this German. And it was said typically that the Danes were not really showing so much fear, mostly confusion. When I think back, on the morning of the 9th, my dad was glued to the radio, and I remember he saying, "Well, I know that they're here, I know they're not going to stay, but I don't know how we're going to get them back. How are we going to get rid of them?" He was worried about Denmark turning into a battlefield. That's what we all thought. This is a situation that happened only early on. This is a military interrogation. This is a Danish Navy officer who was taken in to be interrogated about the situation with the military right at one of the first days. But they did not keep any of these people long. They just let them go, but they had no weapons. Speaking about weapons, all the guns in Denmark were and still are registered. Everybody, if you go to the police station, you get a list of everybody's guns, and they're the names, the addresses of where they are. So when the Germans want to strip the country for guns, all they had to do is go into the local police station, throw the names out, send a little postcard, and here were the guns gone. I mean, they were just stripped. And so there was no way that the Danes could really defend themselves much until they got rearmed, which they did get rearmed. This is a German officer with what at that time was the two-way radio communication system. It's pretty large and cumbersome. This is a little hard to see, this picture, but what actually is happening here is that the first couple of days, the Danes were trying to be friendly with the Germans, and probably felt sorry for some of these soldiers being away from home, so they served in coffee and everything. But it didn't really last too long. This only lasted a few days, and then things stopped changing. But it was interesting that early on, people were trying to accommodate. The girls typically in Denmark like uniformed guys, and they like these smart German soldiers. There was a penalty to be paid for that later on. And when the women fraternized too much with the German soldiers, they got in trouble. They got beaten, they had their hair cut off and that kind of thing. So it was not a smart thing to do. This is a little mermaid in Copenhagen. This is a Hans Christian Andersen figure from the fairy tale. And here are the German tourists. And they're looking at it in the Copenhagen harbor. They were very much aware of the Danish culture. This is a group of German officers who are touring Hans Christian Andersen's birthplace in the town of Odense. Okay, this is something we saw many places. The Germans took over hotels in many places as their military headquarters, and so they would, to please the Danes, they would put up the Danish flag as well as the Hagenkreuz, as they called the swastika. Silent protest was common. This was the young people wearing these little hats, and they were knitted, and it was the semblance of the Royal Air Force emblem on their aircrafts. And so the Danes would wear these, but here is a German officer on the left telling a Danish police to arrest this young person for wearing that hat. So that's how sensitive the situation was. The King of Denmark was a popular person during the war. He was the one who said, lay down your arms, be nice to Germans. But he knew very well the problem that's going to occur later in this situation, because he knew that controlling the Danes was going to be tough. Every day, King Christian X would ride his horse around the Copenhagen streets, and he would get flowers, and they would greet him, and he would thank people and so forth. But one German asked a Dane, he said, you don't have any guards around this man. Who protects him? Well, the Dane that heard him say that said, we all do. Later on, I don't want to forget to mention that, later on, since he was such a symbol for the nation, they wanted to do something to eliminate, the Germans wanted to try to eliminate that, so it's suspected that the Gestapo spooked the horse, because he raised up through the king, and it hurt him bad, and he actually never really recovered, and he lived through the war, but he never really recovered completely. He lived through, actually he was the King of Denmark when a large portion of Jutland was given back to Denmark from Germany after the peace treaty in 1920. So he was there when that happened. He was also there at the Second World War. So he had a long time as king. The resistance started kind of in an odd way. It's kind of a little bit funny sometimes to talk about this, but they had a group of 8 boys who they were trying to do something just to fight the Germans. So what they would do, they would go in where the Germans had their encampments and stuff, and they would crawl in the trucks and they would steal stuff from them, or set trucks on fire and stuff like that. And they kept doing this for a while until they got caught. And then the German called them in, told the parents to come get them, and told the parents, go take them home and give them a good spanking. Well, it didn't last long. They kept doing it, so they got caught again. This is a picture of where they were blown up in a munition factory. So what happened was they put them in jail, and they were going to stay there for a while. Well, the family members were allowed to come in and visit them. So the kids asked their mothers or their fathers to bring a file so we can cut through these bars. And so they did that, and they cut the bars off the window, and they crawled out, went on night stuff, still doing the stuff they were doing, crawled back into jail and were there the next morning. And it went on for a few months until they finally got caught on that too. But these kids stayed there for the rest of the occupation. So this was kind of the beginning of the resistance, and it became clear to a lot of people that something had to be done. So groups were formed. A lot of it was done with university students, high school students, and they formed groups all over the country, and they got in contact in shortwave radio with the British in London, and then that's how the delivery of weapons started. This is a situation you saw more often than you like to remember. Danes killed on the street, and immediately flowers start coming. One of the early activities was getting a free press printed, and so that they could get some message out to the Danes about what was really happening in the war, because you couldn't get it on a local radio station. So through shortwave radio, they were able to get information what was happening with the Allies, and then they would reprint these papers, and they would distribute them clandestinely. A cousin of mine was involved in this, and they got caught. And what he was actually doing was developing pictures for this free press, and he got caught. He was sent to concentration camp for the rest of the war. He was in Buchenwald from 1944, no, 43 to 45, and came home skin and bones. He and his wife came up to the farm, and he got fed up for a couple of months because he was pretty skinny and had a tough time. He told us some horrible things about the concentration camp. Here's some more printing. This was the high school I went to, and what actually happened to this was that the Germans took this, like they took so many things, so many buildings and so forth, and they made it into a military hospital. It was almost entirely destroyed on the inside. It had to be completely redone. But it was a beautiful place, and they got it beautified again. It's a nice place. So while they took the school, us kids had to be taught other places. So this shows where a teacher is teaching the students at his house. My class went to school in a local, it was kind of a local building in the town of Viborg. It was like, I'm trying to remember what the name was, but it was a district court kind of thing. I think it was a district court, because we were being taught in one of those type of localities. And it was really not a big problem, but again, it was something that reminded you daily of what we had to put up with. This is shows the fields. This is taken from a high point from my dad's farm. The local church is here, and this is the farm buildings right here. My grandfather lived in this house. He was retired from the farm. Okay, so this was a high point. A lot of parachuting took place in that area. It was right in kind of the central part of Jutland, and it was easy for the partisans to take these containers and quickly hide them. If they got in trouble and they didn't have time to get it into the forest area, they would hide it in my dad's barn. And he didn't really know about it. We didn't know they were doing that. And if the Germans had found out about it, it got us in deep trouble. These containers came in. I would be surprised if they dropped less than a couple 100,000 of these in the last couple of years of the war. Here is this dark picture that shows the partisans opening these containers. And this is what they looked like. They had a lot of things in there that would help the partisans, not just rifles, ammunition, but a lot of dynamite and special kind of detonators and plastic explosives and also medical supplies. And along with that, they usually had some small newspapers to distribute among people. When weapons started becoming common, we had to be careful to hide them well. And so the Danes had a lot of innovative ways of carrying guns through checkpoints. They used school kids for a long time, and they would put handguns and dynamite and so forth into kids' handbags. But after the Germans found out about that, they set up checkpoints. So every morning after that, when we went to school, then they examined our little backpacks and stuff where our folks make sure we didn't carry stuff. So I don't remember being scared or anything. I think that the checkpoint soldiers were just extremely friendly and just kind of laughed it off. But it was a serious matter. It shows how the Danes were hiding things to take through checkpoints, canned food, heels in a shoe for a detonator. This was actually a shortwave radio. I don't know how it worked. We chew on that for a while. And again, a birdhouse with a radio. Now this is a little bit of a long story. This particular building is a rebuilt building after the war. It's at the University of Aarhus, which was the second largest city in the country. And next, here's what happened. And this is in 1943. After some of these partisans were interned and arrested, they were sent to interrogation in the basement of one of these university buildings. I don't know how many there were, but let's just guess a couple hundred probably, sitting in the basement. There probably at least that many. And the resistance was very concerned because they knew that through interrogation they could find out more about who some of these other people were who were involved. So, and this was through, when I say interrogation, I mean torture. So they told the British they'd like to have that building bombed. And they really had the idea that it was going to be wiped out. But that's not what happened. 2 airplanes came in low. And they literally threw these bombs through the front door of this university building. They just threw right through there and destroyed the whole thing. Well, what was odd about this was that all the Germans got killed, but the Danes were in the basement, they survived. It's amazing. But that's what happened. They tried to do it again in the shell building in Copenhagen, but they destroyed the shell building, but they didn't get the Danes out. So that was kind of a negative notation on this. This is a rabbi, Melchior, and he was a very well-known person in Copenhagen. and there were 8,000 Jewish people, citizens living in Copenhagen and the surrounding areas during the war. That's where most of the Jews lived. The Jews were considered by the Danes as very valuable citizens, and they would do anything to protect them. And this is very different from what actually happened in some other occupied countries like Holland and Czechoslovakia and Poland. The Danes protected the Jews, and the general who was in charge of their occupation, his name was General Werner Best, and he understood this. Best was a tough guy, but he knew that if he touched the Jewish situation, this could cause some major problems for his occupation. So he just let it go. He didn't do anything to them, just kept track of where they were. Well, by August of 1943, Hitler finally got to the point where he wanted to get rid of the Jews out of Denmark. So he called Werner Best into Berlin and told him that the situation with the Jews in Denmark going free was an embarrassment to the German people. And Werner Best was told by Ribbentrop, you go now and get rid of these people. Get them out of the country. So he went back to his office in Copenhagen, and he was shaken. He didn't know what to do, because he knew that if he took the Jews, there would be a big problem. He confided to his friend by the name of Duckwitz. Duckwitz was a former ambassador to Denmark before the war and was on the staff of Best's office. And he confided with Duckwitz that what's going to happen and that they want to intern these Jews on the Jewish holiday. And so, and it was just a few days away here in late August. And I think the Jewish holiday is like 1st of October, something like that. I think it happened. And so Duckwitz knew immediately what he had to do. So he told a friend of his who was a former member of the government of Denmark by the name of Hedtoft. He told Hedtoft what was going to happen to the Jews in a few days, and something had to be done. So Hedtoft went to Melchior, and Melchior knew immediately what he needed to do. And so he called his congregation together and he said the following, and I guess this is supposed to be verbatim what he said. The address of your congregation in Copenhagen Synagogue. There will be no service this morning. Instead, I have very important news to tell you. Last night I received word that tomorrow the Germans plan to raid all Jewish homes throughout Copenhagen to arrest all the Danish Jews for shipment to concentration camps. We must take immediate action. You must leave the synagogue now and contact all relatives, friends, and neighbors you know who are Jewish, and tell them that what I have told you. You must tell them to pass the word on to everyone they know is Jewish. You must also speak to all your Christian friends and tell them to warn the Jews. We must do this immediately, within the next few minutes, so that 2 or 3 hours from now, everyone will know what is happening. By nightfall tonight, we must all be hiding. By nightfall, most of the Danish Jews had disappeared into the homes of non-Jewish friends and neighbors. Sympathetic strangers also volunteered to help. Mendel Katlev, a Jewish foreman in a Copenhagen leather goods factory, left work on hearing of the roundup and caught a commuter train home. The conductor of this train, a man Ketlev saw daily but had never spoken to, asked him why he was leaving work so early. Ketlev told the conductor of the German plans and remarked that he had to look for a place to hide. The conductor immediately offered refuge in his own home to Ketlev, his wife, and his children. Some non-Jews sought out Jewish families and offered them keys to city apartments and country cottages. When Jorgen Knudsen, a young Copenhagen ambulance driver, heard the news, he went to a telephone booth, made a list from the directory and poured through it looking for Jewish-sounding names. All day long he drove through the city, calling on Jewish families to warn them. Several families told him they had no place to hide, so he bundled them into his ambulance, took them to Bispebjerg Hospital, where they were hidden in doctors' quarters or admitted as patients and scattered through the wards. On the night of the roundup, only 284 Jews were arrested. In the following month, the Germans managed to find and arrest scarcely 200 more. 7,200 Jews who escaped the Nazi roundup remained safely in hiding until they could be smuggled to Sweden in fishing boats. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit emotional here, but that's just part of it. Here is a roundup. A few of those guys didn't make it. And here is the situation where the fishermen are loading up their boats to go to Sweden. And here are some of the Jews. The Jews are the ones with the hats. But it's just amazing that they were able to transport more than 6,000 Jews on these little boats in a matter of just a couple months. Amazing. I might want to mention that in the 1930s, there was an effort for the Jews to get out of Germany. And so some of these, mostly younger Jews, were immigrating out to other countries like Denmark to work on farms and factories and so forth to get away from Germany. And then eventually they were supposed to find a way to get to a way. Well, I don't know what's the matter. But anyway, we were trying to help these people so they can get away from Germany and later make it back to the Palestinian areas and form a new country. Clear back at that time they were trying to do that. It's not doing anything, is it?
No.
Yeah,
Okay.
just talk about it.
All right.
Just talk about it.
So, my parents helped that effort. The last Jew we had on the farm was named Wolfgang Müncher, and he, and I think he came in 1939. He was a very talented man. He was in his 30s, but he knew he had to get out of Germany. He left behind in Berlin his parents and his sister. What was interesting about this whole thing was that before, this was like early 1940s, before the April occupation, he was called in with a lot of other Jews into Copenhagen, and the Jewish organization said, you must leave now because Denmark's going to be occupied. Duh! They knew it. And the Danish government acted like it didn't know it was going to happen, but the Jews knew it. Well, anyway, he told my parents that, I'm sorry, but I have to leave. We're being told to get out. So he got to Sweden, from there to England, joined the British Army, was on D-Day in Normandy. He survived. After the war, he was really a dear friend. He went to Berlin after the war as a soldier to look for his family, and his mom and dad and sister had died in Buchenwald. So he later, we didn't really know what had happened to him. So he came back for a visit, and he visited my dad. I was living in the States at that time, but he visited my dad and told his story that he had gotten to England and all of this, and then when he found out his family had died, he immigrated to the States. And he was, for many years, was the department manager at bases in New York, and eventually retired in Florida. And that's where I heard from him, was in Florida. But I didn't keep up in contact with him. He was a much older person. But anyway, he had a decent life after the war. This is a picture of the foundations of fortifications all along the Danish coast. I should have had some better pictures. There were some of these fortifications were enormous. I mean, the size of this club here, I mean, it was enormous. It was massive concrete bunkers with big guns and so forth, gun emplacement. This is all what was left in a lot of places, which is the foundations. But you see it everywhere. It's so massive, you'll never get rid of it. The whole situation with the occupation was such that it was, well, it's kind of hard to explain, but it seemed like it was kind of like, what are we going to do? You know, it was kind of hopeless. You know, you didn't even know, it was just in a shock. A few days after the Germans arrived, my parents and I, we went into town. I don't remember my brother being with us, but we were walking around to see the German military and what was going on. They were setting up command posts in different places. And they also had the general installed in the best hotel, which I showed you a picture of, which is Hotel Chrysler. And we were walking down the street, and here was a gunshot that rang out, and the Dane fell on the ground and killed. And I remember lots of blood and everything. It turned out later that it was supposedly an accident, so forth. The day, the April 9th, when all this happened, I didn't want to go to school. And I just wanted to sit there and listen to the radio with my dad. My parents said, "You're going to go to school." So I walked like I usually did up along a hedgerow, and here came one of these German bombers roaring down real low, and it was so low I could feel this. It's like I was lifted out of the hedgerow and scared to death. And the plane just kind of gained a little momentum. It was sputtering, and then it went over the hill, and it crashed, and it was an enormous explosion. It must have been loaded with bombs because the hole after the explosion was the size of a house. So you see what happened there. Here's this family living out in the country, you know, in a very idyllic place and everything, and then suddenly, in a matter of hours, you're in the middle of violence. So that was hard to get used to. It really was. But we got through it after the war. We had armies coming in from Sweden consisting of Danes who had escaped during the war into Sweden, formed into military companies to take possession of different things to make sure that Germans were not uprising and causing problems. There were some shootings, some killings, but these Swedish trained soldiers helped a lot to maintain order, and because you got to remember, you had no government, no police, no military, anything, just people. And so this military force was trying to kind of step in and take over so that we could transform into kind of a normal way of life. which helped an awful lot in that particular early days. What happened to the Germans was that they were rounded up and stripped of everything but their clothes, and they walked single file to the border where they were sent to wherever home they were. It was probably one of the most degrading things to see these proud soldiers stripped, walking home, lost everything. I mean, yeah, we hated the Germans at that time, but you also got to realize that this was a total devastation for them. They had nothing. They were buying stuff for the families, butter and meat and everything. As soon as they got to the border, everything was taken away from them. The only thing they had was the uniforms. So that's how it ended. That's how we saw the end. And then the British soldiers started coming in, and it was all very exciting. They sent in their big tanks and their trucks and everything, and we still had a lot of military for about a month or so until we were able to establish some kind of government. So that's kind of most of it. Are there any questions?
Bart, do you have any thoughts about gun control that is very
Well,
controversial in America?
I really have, but it's kind of like you can't get away from registering guns. That's just one of those things. And so even though it would have been better if we could control people without registration, it's probably difficult. I would have preferred not to register guns, but you've got to be realistic about it. I don't like gun control. I really don't, because you see what happened.
How did you come to America?
I came in 1956 as an immigrant. Yeah, I had a sponsor, and I...
By yourself or with your parents, or
By himself.
by yourself?
Yeah, yeah. So,
So how did you meet your wife?
well, it was a
Blind
blind date.
date. Blind date.
Through somebody I worked with and knew, a friend of Judy's, and we got together.
Oh, okay.
They've been married 51 years.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I get a little emotional about some of this.
How old were you when the
I
Germans
was
got
actually 9 years old when I came. I was born in 1930, it was 1940. Born in November, so I hadn't turned 10 yet.
Did you lose any immediate family? Did the Germans kill any of your immediate family or cousins?
I don't know of anybody that was killed. I have this one cousin who was in a concentration camp.
Oh, yeah.
And beyond that, I'm not really too sure, because you got to remember, we didn't even know who they were, because nobody talked. And then after the war was over, everybody came out of hiding with armbands, so we knew most of these people, what they were involved with. And how later we found out what they were doing with the weapons in the dad's barn. We didn't even know it was happening. Yeah, they were in Denmark. They had a little over 5 years. They had the occupation. So it was a tough 5 years.
Kind of interested, obviously, you didn't take some of these pictures. Where did you
How do I
collect
get 'em?
these? What?
How do I find the pictures?
Yeah.
Oh, a lot of different ways. I saved a lot of this stuff from the time, and then some of it out of books, like how they hided weapons. I got that out of a book. But a lot of these other pictures were just from what I had from way back.
You took the pictures yourself, some of those?
I didn't
early
take any of the pictures.
Okay.
No, these were just made available.
ones? Okay.
And I could have brought a lot more, but it is time restraint.
Well,
Did the Germans take any treasures? I mean,
Okay,
Denmark,
that's
during
a
the
good
occupation?
point. They took everything, food, material, manufactured stuff, built all these bunkers with Danish material, and they said we were going to get paid. They paid nothing. So when the war was over, the Danish treasure was stripped. What money was there was valueless. So what we had to do was print new money. People who illegally made money off the Germans during the war lost some of this money because they couldn't exchange it, because they were hiding it. So this went one way of cleaning up the problem they had after the war. There was just too much illegal money floating around. So they had to replace the kroner with a new kroner.
Or
Yeah.
tell about your college education.
Do you like it?
What is your college education?
No, that's not true. What do you mean? Sorry, my hair is
Or-
terrible.
Okay, he got his college education in Denmark. He's a civil engineer.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
So I just wanted to know that. And then he was in the Danish military.
Yeah, I was actually a lieutenant. I got out of military as the first lieutenant of the reserve in the engineering company under the Army in Denmark, and I was in occupation in Germany. We were actually the last occupation forces in Germany after the war. But it's a good time. I met a lot of Americans there, and I liked them. I liked them better than the British, so I came here.